So, you ever hear of this book called Watchmen?
Yes, the legendary 12-issue series by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons from 1986 that redefined comics, ushering in a new grim and gritty deconstructionist era that the industry has yet to truly emerge from.
I've never really had any intention of covering it on this show. In fact, it's actually part of a banned list alongside the likes of Mouse and Persepolis, mainly because I'm not contributing anything to the discourse by reviewing Watchmen. It's like reviewing the music of the Beatles or Citizen Kane, Casablanca, the works of Rembrandt. You don't need me to tell you it's great. You want a Watchmen review, go read Watchmen. It's great. That's all I could really tell you. That being said, because the book we're covering today really ties into Watchmen, I kind of have to discuss the plot of Watchmen. Not the whole story, because we'd just be here all day, but we're going to be focusing on four principal characters from the story. Rorschach, Ozymandias, the Comedian, and Dr. Manhattan.
The characters of Watchmen were reinterpretations of characters owned by Charlton Comics, a company whose characters were later purchased by DC. The main thrust of the story centered around the murder of Edward Blake, aka the Comedian, who was based on the Charlton character Peacemaker. The Comedian was an ultra-violent hero bankrolled by the CIA, who often employed him as an assassin and just out-and-out murderer on several occasions. Investigating the murder is the uber-ruthless and violent vigilante Rorschach, based on the Charlton character The Question, who in this case wears a specialized mask that reflects the titular psychological test. The investigation turns up that several individuals connected to Dr. Manhattan have recently been diagnosed and are dying of cancer, possibly due to Manhattan, based on the Charlton superhero Captain Atom, being a being of pure radiation and constantly putting it out all the time. Manhattan was a scientist working for the Manhattan Project who, while working on the bomb, got caught in an explosion that, like I said, turned him into a being of pure radiation. Manhattan has been driven so far out of society that he's completely aloof to the situations of many around him, and this has eventually driven him off planet to the planet of Mars. However, Rorschach, along with several others, eventually turned out that the Comedian discovered that the cancer was actually brought about due to the manipulations of Adrian Veidt, Ozymandias, a brilliant scientist and industrialist adventurer based on Peter Cannon Thunderbolt. Ozymandias wanted the public to lose faith in Manhattan in order to drive the Doctor off planet, so he could then stage an alien invasion via a giant genetically altered squid that would force the global superpowers to work together in order to destroy it, and thus bring about world peace. The Comedian found out about this plan, leading Ozymandias to kill his former cohort. Later, when Rorschach and several others confront Ozymandias at his headquarters in Antarctica, he reveals that it's too late and the invasion has already begun. Rorschach still intended to reveal everything, however, the others begin to agree that, hey, maybe the loss of a few million lives in exchange for world peace is probably worth it. This leads Dr. Manhattan to kill Rorschach before anything can truly get done. However, the final panel of the comic reveals that Rorschach had mailed his journal containing all of those secrets to an ultra-libertarian newspaper called the New Frontiersman.
Again, I know I'm leaving out major parts of the story that really help add to the text and make the story really fuller and a much richer narrative, but again, we'd be here all day. So again, that's kind of why I'm cutting that all out. Now, Watchmen, it's great. Is it perfect? No. There's a few scenes in the story I find to be needlessly gratuitous, and Alan Moore himself admitted he cribbed the big twist from an episode of The Outer Limits. Still, though, it's a very enjoyable read, and if you want to, you should read it. That being said, there's also a very interesting story about what is essentially the fallout from Watchmen.
Like I said earlier, Alan Moore had based the characters in Watchmen off of the characters in Charlton Comics, who are now owned by DC. In fact, Moore had initially pitched this as a Charlton character story, only for DC to talk him out of it and suggest actually creating new characters instead. And because these were interpretations and not the actual characters themselves, Moore believed that he and Gibbons actually owned the rights to them. This all came to a head in 2000s when plans for a 15th anniversary trade paperback were announced. Eventually, Moore entered into agreement that the rights to the Watchmen characters would revert to him and Gibbons once Watchmen went out of print.
Watchmen has never been out of print. The softcover remained in print for decades, getting a re-release in time for the 20th anniversary, and then when the movie came out. And there's even been deluxe hardcover editions, absolute editions, and just last year they released a $10 compact edition. So yeah, Watchmen is pretty much readily available everywhere. And that's not the only thing.
In 2011, DC released a group of prequel miniseries under the banner of Before Watchmen, and though it attracted the talented likes of J. Michael Straczynski and the late Darwyn Cooke, Before Watchmen proved to be unremarkable and is best known for only further upsetting Moore. Then in 2016, the real big one hit.
DC held a special event called Rebirth that basically acted as a reboot to a reboot that was the New 52. Basically, aspects of the pre-New 52 continuity crossed over into the New 52 universe and sort of merged it into the old continuity with a few aspects from the New 52 that people like sticking around. Yeah, it's really confusing.
The real doozy came with the revelation that effectively both reboots have been brought about by none other than Dr. Manhattan, as Batman discovered the comedian's signature bloody smile button in the Batcave. This could only mean one thing, that Watchmen would soon be brought into mainstream DC continuity. However, Alan Moore was oddly silent about all of this, as he seemed to have been distracted by something.
Oh, little Lulu, I love you, Lou, just the same.
In 2017, the crossover finally happened via a 12-issue miniseries from writer Jeff Johns and artist Gary Frank, which is what we're reviewing today. This is Doomsday Clock.
The year is 1992. Rorschach's journal has been published and Ozymandias has been discredited. Rioting fills the streets as the superpowers have decided that it's just time to nuke everything. It's gotten so bad that the newly elected president has been taken hostage by the vice president. The military is attempting to locate Ozymandias at his Antarctic stronghold, but it's been completely abandoned, with only a scan of a head containing an inoperable brain tumor being left on the wall. At a prison located just outside New York City, a riot breaks out, only for it to suddenly be interrupted by the appearance of Rorschach. He arrives to specifically break out the supervillain Erica Manson, aka Marionette, out of prison. She won't leave without her husband Marco Myers, aka the Mime. However, Rorschach does seem to have some leverage in that he has the knowledge of the location of the couple's son that was born in prison. However, she still insists, so Mime also gets broken out, managing to arm up all of his invisible weapons. The trio then manage to get out of the prison and get to Rorschach's car just as the missiles are launched into the air.
Hallelujah.
Upon arrival in the Big Apple, Rorschach takes the two villains into the sewers of New York City and into the base of Dan Deering, aka Night Owl, where they meet their benefactor, Ozymandias. Marionette demands to know where her son is, but Ozymandias explains that they don't have time for that right now, as they need to complete a very specific mission. They need to locate Dr. Manhattan, who's isolated himself in another universe. Meanwhile, in Metropolis, a sleeping Clark Kent remembers his senior prom. His parents, John and Martha, dropped him off despite him not having a prom date, as Lana Lang was going with Pete Ross. John and Martha assure Clark that he can still have fun before leaving. It's then that the family pickup is struck by a semi-truck and catapulted into a tree, killing the Kents. Clark then wakes up screaming and flying. Lois points out that his parents are still alive and this was probably just a nightmare, something Clark Kent has never truly experienced.
Before you go bringing about those Justice League episodes, different universe, remember?
Mime and Marionette suit up as Ozymandias explains why they're needed by playing footage of the bank robbery where the two are arrested by none other than Dr. Manhattan. Normally in this scenario, Dr. Manhattan killed people doing such crimes. However, he stopped once he realized that Erica was pregnant. This has made Ozymandias believe that Manhattan still has some type of connection to humanity, as he wouldn't have normally stopped in these scenarios. The trio, along with Rorschach, then proceed to board the Owl ship and take off, just jumping into another dimension right as the missiles strike in New York City. Meanwhile, Bruce Wayne is finishing a required psych evaluation by purposely blowing, of all things, a Rorschach test. Tensions in Gotham City are really high at the moment as the public is marching more and more against superheroes with open protests happening in the streets. It's in the middle of all of this that the Owl ship arrives and immediately crashes. The villains are chained up as Ozymandias and Rorschach split up. Rorschach has serene manner where he proceeds to chow down on the pancakes that Alfred had left out for Bruce to enjoy his breakfast with. It's then that Rorschach decides to enter the Batcave via the grandfather clock, tripping the alarm and alerting the attention of the Dark Knight. Meanwhile, Ozymandias visits Lex Luthor to explain everything about Dr. Manhattan.
It's mime time.
Mime and Marionette proceed to break out via the invisible lockpick that he is able to cough up from his stomach. Back at LuthorCorp, before Lex can call security, he's shot by none other than Edward Blake, the comedian.
This all but confirms Dr. Manhattan's presence in the DC Universe, as the comedian here was pulled out of the Watchmen timeline shortly before he died.
Comedian attempts to replicate his murder by tossing Ozymandias through the window. The glass is a little bit stronger than it was in 1986, which allows for Veidt to cut the power off to the office. Unfortunately, his attempt to get the jump on Comedian is thwarted when he slips on Luthor's blood, which allows Comedian to grab Ozymandias and throw him out of the window where he falls to the streets below. It's only thanks to some protective awning that he's not turned into mush on the streets. Back at the Batcave, Rorschach turns over the original Rorschach's journal asking Batman to read it. The Dark Knight allows his uninvited guest to make use of the facilities and eat more of Alfred's pancakes. Meanwhile,
it's mime time.
Mime and Marionette head to a local dive bar with the ruffians inside accuse them of attempting to spoof some individual called the Joker. One massive bar fight later and the two are drowning in free booze. While that plays out, news breaks of the attempt on Lex Luthor's life, which is attributed to a metahuman arms race that has ramped up in the wake of the publishing of a controversial conspiracy called the Superman Theory. The theory posits that the U.S. government is using the existence of Superman to create their own super soldier program and thus win the arms race. None of this really matters to nursing home resident Johnny Thunder, who keeps waiting for family to visit, but they never do.
We talked a little bit about Johnny Thunder back in episode 29 of the Random Trade Review, where I covered the JSA storyline, The Return of Hawkman. Johnny could basically summon a magical genie from a pen by uttering the phrase CU, spelled CEI-U. This summoned a genie called the Thunderbolt, who was able to grant Johnny's wishes. He would eventually join the Justice Society after that. As time went on, Johnny Thunder developed dementia and basically gave the pen over to the Flash, Jay Garrick, who then inadvertently gave it to a 12-year-old named Jakeem Williams, who then became the new owner of the Thunderbolt. Years later, when Johnny finally succumbed to his dementia and passed away, the Thunderbolt merged with Johnny to create their own separate genie being.
Late at night, Bruce Wayne rakes Rorschach with the news that he's managed to locate Dr. Manhattan. The two head to Arkham Asylum, where Batman opens the door to what he claims to be Manhattan's cell, only for it to be a ruse and Rorschach to be admitted as a new patient. As the Dark Knight leaves, Rorschach swears to gouge out Batman's eyes, and all of this begins triggering deep memories in Reggie Long, aka Rorschach.
Okay, so obviously this is not the Rorschach from Watchmen. He died, remember? That was Walter Kovacs, and during Watchmen he wound up imprisoned, where he came under the tutelage of a psychologist named Malcolm Long, whose son is Reggie Long, this new Rorschach. Now Reggie believes that Rorschach and Malcolm Long got along well and were friends, trying to develop some type of relationship before the giant squid attack killed both of Reggie's parents and drove him to the point that he needed to be sent to an insane asylum.
At the asylum, Reggie was prone to violent outbursts and made several attempts to escape, on one occasion making it all the way to a roof where he found another patient named Byron who claimed to be a former hero named Mothman with the ability to fly. Byron assured Reggie that he always has the ability to see what he wants to, as Mothman then proceeds to literally take off and fly away, only to be caught at a greasy spoon a few miles from the facility. His growing friendship with Byron allowed Reggie to see the way in what he believed Walter Kovacs did. with Mothman constantly journeying out to retrieve files from Malcolm Long's office, in particular the ones focusing on Walter Kovacs, aka Rorschach. However, when Walter Kovacs' journal is published and Ozymandias loses all his standing, this causes the government to turn against superheroes, including Byron, requiring them to be transferred to some other type of facility where they will probably be executed. This allows Reggie to stage another escape by setting fire to the facility, in order to then track down Ozymandias and get revenge for his parents who were killed in the squid attack. He and Byron try to make their way out, however, partway through, Byron turns back and begins heading towards the facility again, like a moth being drawn to the flame. Despite Reggie's pleas, Mothman sacrifices himself for Reggie to escape. Reggie would don Rorschach's mask and head to Antarctica to confront Ozymandias. He found the disgraced hero in tears over his cancer diagnosis. Everything began to change when Adrian Veidt began talking about seeing what others wanted to see. Returning to Arkham Asylum, Reggie received a telepathic message from a fellow inmate. She's willing to help, but they have to move now and proceed to make with another escape. As for Ozymandias, he is in the hospital where the police are wanting to talk to him about Lex Luthor. He's a chief suspect in the shooting and escapes soon after waking up, making sure to grab his genetically altered Lynx Pupasus before leaving. At the Daily Planet, Lois is upset that Perry White has altered her story, as she never claimed Luthor's attacker was a metahuman. All of this while international tensions are beginning to storm up more, as Ukraine and Markovia announce that they are closing the borders to all metahuman visitors. Back with Rorschach, his fellow SKP introduces herself as Saturn Girl.
Yes, this is the character from the Legion of Superheroes, and I believe this is the original Legion Superheroes timeline where Superboy was a member, because she brings it up on occasion.
Johnny Thunder reads a news story about a fire destroying a local steel mill in Pittsburgh and feels compelled to make his way over to the place. The only thing that's preventing him is his lack of bus fare. Ozymandias returns to the Owl ship to find Batman waiting for him. He only committed Rorschach over safety concerns, and the two talk as Ozymandias takes off, flying over the protests as they begin to become more unruly. Batman blames Ozymandias for what is going on in his world. However, Veidt points out that these people are all acting of their own course and that he has nothing to really do with this. As the Owl ship gets higher into the air, Ozymandias decides to just dump the Batman out through the open door and down to the mob below. Johnny Thunder does eventually make his way over to the burned-down All-American Steel Mill, where he's immediately accosted by a group of criminals who are using this place as a hideout. While they chase him through the facility, he winds up stumbling into a room containing a Green Lantern.
By which, of course, I mean an actual lantern that is green, not the superhero, the Green Lantern.
Johnny attempts to contact the Thunderbolt, however, again, nothing seems to happen, as if the Thunderbolt never existed in this world. It's then that he winds up getting rescued by none other than Rorschach and Saturn Girl. While that plays out, Batman gets overwhelmed by the protesters who have destroyed the bat signal, and he eventually winds up falling into the hands of...
It's mime time.
Okay, I promise that's the last time I'll do that joke. Anyway, this allows Mime and Marionette to finally wind up meeting the Joker as they take Batman hostage.
The backstory of Mime and Marionette is that they were both the children of immigrants who owned shops that were located across the street from each other. Erica was the child of an Eastern European puppet maker, and Marco was the child of a Latino glassblower. However, they both lost their loved ones in a protection money racket run by corrupt police officials, and that sent the two out on a crime spree, with Mime developing the ability to fire weapons that don't actually exist in his hand, and Marionette developing razor-sharp wires that also act as string.
The Joker takes Mime and Marionette into his gang and proceeds to bring them, as well as the unconscious Batman, down into a subway tunnel where the Riddler has called together a special meeting of several different rogues galleries, not just Batman, but also that of the Flash, Wonder Woman, and Green Lantern. They've all heard that Black Adam has opened up the borders of conduct for all metahumans, good or bad, and are considering taking him up on the offer. All of this is interrupted by the comedian, who immediately opens fire on the group, including blasting the Riddler through his knee. Mime and Marionette flee as the comedian tosses a grenade into the picture and the Joker and Batman take cover. The two think they managed to give the comedian the slip and proceed to find their way to a hotel room where they finally manage to have sex with each other.
You know, those two have been separated for like years. You think they would have gotten to this a lot sooner.
The couple's post-coital canoodling is interrupted by none other than the comedian locating them, only for the master mercenary to suddenly be dropped by one of the Joker's joy buzzers. However, at the end of the day, everyone involved just wants to know one thing: where exactly are Ozymandias and Dr. Manhattan? It turns out that Ozymandias is out picking up Rorschach, Johnny Thunder, and Saturn Girl, as they also bring along the Lantern, which seems to have picked up a blue stowaway.
This is meant to be the Green Lantern of Alan Scott, the Green Lantern of the Golden Age of comics, who found his magical lantern after a train wreck that almost cost him his life. This allowed him to tap into his Green Lantern abilities and become a superhero. He would then go on to be a founding member of the Justice Society of America. However, Dr. Manhattan has been manipulating the timeline and has moved the lantern 6 inches to the left, so now Scott doesn't find it and he winds up dying from his injuries.
The group begins tuning into news reports of metahumans flowing into Kondak while Ukraine, Russia, and Markovia begin tightening their borders. The only exception to this is Superman, who's seen as a worldwide hero acting of his own accord. Ozymandias explains that his bulbossus has been genetically altered in order to track Dr. Manhattan due to containing some of his DNA, and that they can track his energy signature to his precise location in order to summon him. Back with the Joker, Mime, and Marionette, they set about torturing the comedian until Batman revives and prepares to take all 3 villains on. It's not easy for the Dark Knight, though, as Marionette manages to tangle him in her wire and even cut through his gauntlets. However, it's then that the Owl ship arrives and they begin summoning Dr. Manhattan. Manhattan proceeds to teleport everyone from his universe to his headquarters on Mars. He knows why they're on this Earth, but he isn't going to be returning home. He explains that he can now see the whole of time, the entire time flow and stream, so he's able to sense certain things, like what Marionette's unborn child was going to do. That's why he spared her, not just because she was pregnant. That being said, he will spare her once again because, well, Marionette is pregnant once again.
Oh, so that's why they waited so long to have sex.
Rorschach begins pleading with Dr. Manhattan, pointing out Ozymandias' condition and the limits that he has pushed himself through to even get to this point. There's just one tiny problem, though. Ozymandias, in fact, does not have cancer. Rorschach only saw what he wanted to see in order to not kill Ozymandias, and Ozymandias exploited it. Dr. Manhattan further points out that Malcolm Long was not the friend of Walter Kovacs, as the Moth had actually taken out several files that were hidden from Reggie.
In reality, Walter Kovacs drove Malcolm Long into a deep depression to the point that it ended Long's marriage, and thus Reggie's parents separated and were apart from each other when the giant squid attack killed them.
Manhattan also goes on to explain that there's something big that's going to be happening in this universe. The last thing he sees is a confrontation with the most hopeful among them, aka Superman. The Man of Steel begins charging at Dr. Manhattan, only for everything to suddenly fade to black. Manhattan now believes that essentially all universes are fated to die, and then he takes them back to the Batman and Joker. Rorschach attacks Ozymandias and the Joker, ripping off his mask and claiming that he is no longer Rorschach. The momentary break in Ozymandias' concentration allows Saturn Girl to read his mind and thus learn what his actual plans are, as he immediately knocks her out with one punch and takes off in the Owl ship with Johnny Thunder. Dr. Manhattan returns to Mars. Meanwhile, at the Daily Planet, Lois and Clark look at a report from Moscow covering a confrontation between Firestorm and Pojar. This interrupted a political rally, but the two nuclear men have taken exception to each other, as the American version Firestorm is seen as proof of the existence of Superman theory.
Okay, bear with me, this one's going to be kind of long and a little bit confusing, as it was confusing to me. The continuity with Firestorm is that Ronnie Raymond and Professor Martin Stein were bonded together after a nuclear accident somehow fused the two. They could separate, but when they become Firestorm, they bond together. However, it was eventually revealed that Martin Stein was always supposed to become a fire elemental, basically a god of fire, and he eventually got those powers and left of his own accord, with Ronnie basically being Firestorm on his own. Ronnie was killed during the Identity Crisis event, and the mantle of Firestorm passed on to a new person named Jason Roush, who could bond with a lot of people to form Firestorm. In fact, at one point, he bonded with Martin Stein. However, Ronnie would eventually come back and be his own Firestorm, and I don't think he ever rebonded with Martin Stein at any point. Then, in the New 52 continuity. Martin Stein was basically a third party altogether, and Firestorm consisted of Ronnie Raymond and Jason Rausch. See? Oh, and Pojar, he's a Russian Firestorm equivalent who got his powers in Chernobyl because it's always Chernobyl.
Firestorm is knocked to the ground and soon overwhelmed by a mob of onlookers, and he begins losing control of his powers, resulting in a fireball that is so intensely hot that it turns everyone in the surrounding area to glass. Although it's only an accident, the act is immediately dubbed a terrorist attack by the US government, and Superman takes off from the Daily Planet. The Man of Steel doesn't head to Moscow, but rather to Kondak to meet with Black Adam, believing that Firestorm has taken refuge in the country. Black Adam allows Superman to look for Firestorm, but not to turn him over to the authorities. Back at the Daily Planet, Lois Lane finds something on a flash drive about the Justice Society of America, and not having any idea as to what exactly that is. Superman manages to locate Firestorm hiding in a cave, attempting to return one of the glass people to normal. The Man of Steel encourages the Nuclear Man in his attempts and stands by as it's eventually proven to be successful. From there, Superman heads to Moscow to lobby for peace and allow Firestorm to try to change everyone back. However, this blows up in his face as he's now seen as acting on behalf of the United States government. Even when Firestorm appears with the now healed child, a massive fight breaks out and several of the glass people are smashed.
Why do they leave the glass people out in the open like that?
Batman, who has been monitoring the situation from afar, pleads with Superman to try to get things resolved peacefully and not let things get out of hand. However, it's at this point that Firestorm appears to begin losing control of his powers, resulting in a massive explosion that looks a lot similar to Dr. Manhattan, and everyone being killed, apparently, much to the delight of Ozymandias. The source of the explosion is tracked back to Mars, and tracked all the way back to Mars, and several heroes prepare to head to the planet to confront whoever was responsible for this, i.e. Dr. Manhattan. It's not just representatives of the Justice League. There's also the Titans, the Green Lantern Corps, the Doom Patrol, these guys. An unconscious Superman has been taken back to the Hall of Justice to recuperate while Lois Lane stands a vigil over him. Meanwhile, Reggie has taken to the streets joining the anti-metahuman protests in Gotham. However, Batman does not approve of anyone else trying to confront Dr. Manhattan and tries to contact them before they get to Mars. It's too late though, as they have already landed on the planet. Meanwhile, Lois is contacted by none other than Lex Luthor, who reveals that he's the one who sent the JSA flash drive. He can't help but find it just a tiny bit strange that an entire group of superheroes were somehow eliminated from history. Back on Mars, the Lanterns put a barrier around the planet so everyone can attack Dr. Manhattan without being catapulted off. The Doctor has the Martian Manhunter relay his final vision of Superman attacking him, which provokes an attack from Guy Gardner. Manhattan rips the lantern ring off a guy's finger and dissolves it in his hands. The Magic Wielders are the next to attack, but all Manhattan does is see what he calls the scraps of creation, which he can easily manipulate and throw back at them in full force. Manhattan then turns his focus to Firestorm and reveals the truth. Superman theory is in fact partly true, as Professor Stein was working on behalf of the government to stage the accident that fused he and Ronnie Raymond into Firestorm. Firestorm snaps and attacks Manhattan, leading to another massive explosion on Mars. Meanwhile, Wonder Woman addresses the United Nations in an attempt to broker some type of peace. This, however, gets interrupted by Black Adam and his forces attacking the complex.
Now it's time to address one of the more prominent subplots from Watchmen, which was the idea of a comic story called Tales from the Black Freighter. In the Watchmen universe, pirate comics supplanted superheroes because superheroes existed in real life, so why would anyone want to read comics about them? Anyway, it followed a pirate who got stranded on an island and had to fight his way back to freedom. Now, Doomsday Clock has kind of its own version of Tales from the Black Freighter in the form of the film series centered around a private investigator named Nathaniel Dusk and the actor who played him, Coleman Carver.
Coleman was mysteriously murdered in 1954 and it was never solved. This intrigued Dr. Manhattan, who discovered that Coleman's mother was blackmailing him in order to keep his homosexuality a secret. Obviously, that would have not only ruined his career, but his overall life in the 1950s. Why is this important? Because it turns out the day that Carver Coleman actually started his Hollywood career was the same day Superman first appeared in 1938. Coleman arrived in Los Angeles and was trying to work his way through the studio system when he caught an executive in a compromising position and was promptly fired. It was at this point that he first met Dr. Manhattan after two police officers were attacking him for being a derelict in an alley. Manhattan would reveal certain aspects of Coleman's future to him as they would meet regularly and the actor's career began taking off, alongside more of Superman's exploits being more popularly known. All the while, Manhattan was also manipulating the disappearance of the JSA, which was brought about due to the confusion over the Man of Steel's origin constantly changing. Everything just kept changing. Sometimes the Kents die. Sometimes it's just Pa Kent that dies. Sometimes Ma and Pa live into old age while Pa dies later. Superboy's part of the Legion of Superheroes. The Kents are killed in a car accident. Everything just keeps changing. The only real constant is that Superman is sort of the focal point of heroes and metahumans appearing in the DC universe. Manhattan then appears to Carver Coleman just before he's murdered, realizing that all of this is his fault, as in the present, Superman finally wakes from his coma. Meanwhile, millions are pondering the notion of using nuclear weapons to stop the metahuman attack on the United Nations, with Batman interceding on one occasion, even though Wonder Woman is attacked by one of Black Adam's lightning bolts. Ozymandias watches on for TV and visits with Saturn Girl. She thinks that he wants to destroy Superman. He reveals that he always knew the unique factors of Marionette's pregnancy as to why Dr. Manhattan didn't kill her, and instead he arranged for the baby to be adopted by people close to Dr. Manhattan.
The baby was adopted by Sally Juszczyk, aka Silk Spectre, the former wife of Dr. Manhattan, and her new partner Dan Dryberg, the former hero Night Owl. Basically, Ozymandias is trying to manipulate things so maybe it plays out more like the Watchmen universe. And in this case, he's trying to play on the kinship that Dr. Manhattan seems to feel with Superman by making people lose their faith in Superman the way he made them lose their faith in Dr. Manhattan. Yeah, I don't really get it that much either.
Ozymandias reveals that he is basically arranging for a timeline to exist without Superman, which means Saturn Girl and the Legion of Superheroes can't possibly exist, causing Imra to crumble into dust. Meanwhile, a revived Superman confronts Black Adam on the White House lawn. The two begin engaging in a fight until Dr. Manhattan finally arrives on Earth to confront Superman. While the two prepare for their big showdown, Lex Luthor takes Lois Lane into a vault beneath LexCorp Tower. He's researched Ozymandias and Dr. Manhattan. Everywhere Dr. Manhattan's appeared, this photograph of a happy couple on a boardwalk suddenly also shows up.
This is a picture of John Osterman, aka Dr. Manhattan's human form, and his first love, Janie, who was also his first wife, who eventually died of cancer due to the constant radiation exposure. Now, this picture has been dropping every time Dr. Manhattan has shown up in the DC Universe to manipulate the timeline.
Before anything further can happen with Dr. Manhattan, Black Adam and his cohorts attack Superman. As that plays out, Reggie finds an aide in Alfred who wants him to redon the Rorschach mask once more to help Superman avert a nuclear conflict, like the one that destroyed Reggie's world. Even Batman joins in to apologize for betraying Reggie. Back in Washington, D.C., Superman is overwhelmed by Black Adam's forces. Still, he fights to protect several innocent bystanders. Finally, he starts pleading with Dr. Manhattan to do something and halt this attack. Manhattan confesses to being behind the manipulations to the time stream to see how this beacon of hope will do in every dark situation.
Yeah.
Much like in the Vision, Superman launches himself at Manhattan and takes out Pojar, who is about to attack the being. Superman points out that there's a third option as another photograph falls to the ground, and Rorschach puts his mask back on. Manhattan realizes that he can make a difference and ends everything with the last light being Superman's emblem. We then see the explosion of the planet Krypton with a lone ship drifting out into space. From there, it begins landing into different parts of Earth's past. It lands in prehistoric times, the Ice Age, 1938, 1985, 2000. There's some timelines where there's a Superboy, others not. Sometimes Superman fights in World War II with the JSA. Sometimes it's just with the Justice League. Back with Ozymandias, the JSA, including Alan Scott and Jakeem Thunder, show up to save Johnny Thunder and remind him that he merged with the Thunderbolt. They then move to help Superman, as Saturn Girl and the Legion of Superheroes also arrive. Black Adam's forces are quickly dealt with, and as that happens, more timelines begin to form, all lead to Superman being the nickname that he's least known for, the Man of Tomorrow. Dr. Manhattan then teleports Ozymandias and the others from his world to Washington, D.C. Once again, the recklessness of Adrian Veidt has somehow saved the planet at a very high cost. However, this will be the last time as comedian shoots Ozymandias, only for Lex Luthor to suddenly arrive and blast the comedian with a vibrational frequency gun that sends him back to his own universe shortly before his death. Though part of him still wants Ozymandias to die, Rorschach instead rips off the mask and uses it to stop the bleeding. Ozymandias will live and be in prison for the rest of his life in this universe. That being said, he'll end up developing a kinship with a woman who will come to call herself Nostalgia, but that won't pay off until later. Possibly. Who knows at this point? Dr. Manhattan prepares to take everyone else back to their universe, except for Mime and Marionette. They have to stay here with their soon-to-be-born daughter and act as an anchor in this universe for their son for the time when he returns. This will be revealed in due time. Finally, Manhattan does one more thing and manages to save the life of Carver Coleman, who comes out publicly and becomes one of the first LGBT rights activists in Hollywood. Eventually, he dies in 2005. Manhattan then returns to the Watchmen universe, where he takes the newly born son of Mime and Marionette. He shows them the time streams, the various universes, what he can do, what he needs to do, before returning him to Sally and Dan, his adopted parents, where he informs them that his name is now Clark.
And that concludes Doomsday Clock. How was it? Well, I really do like a lot of the artwork through this story. I think it does a good job of replicating Dave Gibbons' style with still being its own unique artwork in its own way. So again, I think it does a really good job, especially capturing things like action set pieces and working that into the narrative very well. I like a lot of the characterization in this, Superman in particular. I do like how this has reminded people how important Superman truly is as a beacon of hope. He is, yes, he's the Man of Steel, the last son of Krypton, but he's also the man of tomorrow. He's supposed to be the thing that leads you into the future. So, the idea of bringing about metahumans through Superman, exactly for that reason, that makes sense. It makes, it reminds you again how important Superman is. And, again, there's some really good action set pieces in here. I like characterization on the likes of Ozymandias, Mime and Marionette, the comedian. Even Rorschach to an extent, though I think his story gets a little overwrought. And that's kind of the main problem with this. This is way too padded out for its own good. This was an 8-issue story that is unfortunately a 12-issue story. It tries way too hard to be Watchmen, basically. The 9-panel grid, there's some decompressed parts that just don't need to be. There's literally 3 pages of Reggie leading Mime and Marionette through the sewers to Ozymandias' hideout, and it's just, why? Why does it need to be 3 pages? Condense that down. It's way too dang long. I'm sorry. Just some parts that really meander, oh cool, this big dark revelation about Firestorm is not really brought up again. The idea of, Black Adam turning Kahndaq into this haven for metahumans is cool, but it doesn't really seem to pay off much. There's plot threads that maybe, again, just don't really need to be there, and it just leads to the story being overwrought and muddled and just kind of confusing sometimes. I had to read things 2, 3, 4 times to figure out what this plot was at some points, even to an extent what the likes of Ozymandias and Dr. Manhattan were even doing. And it seems like, again, there's not enough of the DC universe in here. There's way too much Watchmen. And then other times there's way too much DC and not enough Watchmen. I kind of wish there was a more melding of the two universes. So yeah, that's just kind of where that sort of falls apart. Is this story bad? No. In fact, again, like I said, overall I think the story is actually pretty good. But it is a little full of itself. It's overwrought, muddled, way too long and overblown. So, yeah, that really does drag it way down. I don't think it's, like I said, it's not terrible. It's not dull by any stretch of the imagination, but I am going to be giving Doomsday Clock a C. Like I said, it has its moments, but it doesn't really exceed anything in any way, shape, or form. And with that, let's see what we're doing next time on the Random Trade Review.
Hey guys, remember you can support my work at patreon.com/CP Time for Cat Productions, where you can even request a trade to be put in the randomizer, aka the cardboard box. Also, remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so that you can be notified for further videos.